Howdy, howdy. Sue Devil here, and welcome to an after action report, maybe, of the top 10 units under for 400 gold or under. I guess really units ranked from number 1 to number 29. A little bit of supplemental testing, a little bit of discussion, and a little bit of review of exactly how I valued those units, and you know an open forum for discussion. I really enjoyed the testing, found some surprises, found some things that are the way they should be, and we'll go right into the spreadsheet first so I can really show how I actually evaluated everything in terms, so I could get some way of saying this unit is worth more than this unit, even though I'm comparing a unit that might be worth 250 gold to a unit that's 400 gold. What's better gold for gold, pound for pound, second for second? And so when I did the testing, I showed in the primer video, I did I think I did 5 tests for each unit. I did them all against the basic dwarf warriors, and I took the start time, the finish time, the battle time, the end hit points, and looked at really what kind of DPS or damage per second both units were doing, the gold differential if I take their ending hit points divided by their starting hit points, multiplied through by their gold, and compare it to the other unit. What did they pull positive value, negative value, and the gold per minute, the gold ratio, and their win-loss. So we ended up doing 145 tests, 29 units, 145 tests to get this data set. And these are the units I tested. I just went through and did them by group. Beastmen, I went, look, okay, what we've got. And this is the data that I used to actually evaluate them. I looked at a number called seconds per gold. So I knew that the Dwarf Warriors would beat all of these units. That was the first. I wanted to make the test very repeatable, very straightforward, and I didn't want to get any of these weird numbers that happens when 20 units lose to the unit you're testing and 9 units beat it. I mean, that would not give a good clean test in terms of evaluating value. So I knew the Dwarf Warrior would beat them all, and pretty handily, and I would get this information. So battle time is how long the battle took. So for the Beastmen, Ungor, Spearman herd against the Dwarf Warriors, the average battle time was 167 seconds. So what I did, because I think this is important for a cheap unit, how long are they going to last under pressure in just a straight up fight? And how much do you have to pay for that time? So I took their total battle time and divided that by the gold, 300 gold. So I got this unit in general against the Dwarf Warrior will last 0.56 seconds per gold spent. And then that was one of the elements that we valued everything on. And you can see, here's Spearman with shields. They lasted the most, 1.02 seconds per gold spent. They're a very, very good unit for holding the line. And then I looked at the gold differential. How much did each unit lose or win? The only unit that actually pulled value against my Dwarf Warriors were the Peasant Mob, and they pulled a positive 3 gold. Everyone else lost generally a lot of gold because Dwarf Warriors are a very good unit. And that was another element. Then I looked at the gold per minute. Now, this is also important, not just the total gold you're losing, but how fast you're losing it in terms of evaluating all of these units. Now, some of the things that I found was really Bretonia is set up, they have very good low-level units, and they should, because they have a lot of them, and they end up in the right order in this value proposition. So I'll go to this analysis bit. So when I look at the top 29, basically I ranked each one of the elements that were in the top 29, 1 through 29, and then I basically just added them up to give a 6 total. And that's, the Skaven Slave scored a 6, Peasant Mob scored a 9, 18, and the lowest scored an 82 when you add them all up, and that's how I ranked them. Now, when you look at how they showed up in this list, Bretonia shows up in exactly the order you would expect in an infantry on infantry fight. The Peasant Mob, which is a very inexpensive unit, then the men-at-arms, then the men-at-arms with shields, because you gotta give something to get those shields, right? You gotta give some sort of capability in an infantry on infantry engagement, then the spearmen-at-arms, and then the spearmen-at-arms with shields. This is exactly how these units should show up in an infantry on infantry fight. And you see your peasant mobs at number 2, the men-at-arms at number 3. We go down to where's Bretonia. The men-at-arms with shields at number 11, and spearmen-at-arms number 14, and the spearmen-at-arms with shields at 18, this is exactly how they should show. Now the beastmen are all sorts of messed up, and they showed up exactly backwards. The Ungor spearmen herd with shields was the best for them, then the Ungor spearmen herd, then the Ungor herd. And I did talk about this. This is completely borked. It won't make any sense. And this kind of thing is really, I think it's unfair to new players, because these units should be at least intuitive enough to say, if I'm planning to bring a unit for an infantry fight, an Ungor herd is going to do better than an Ungor spearman herd with shields, right? Bretonia is very logical, right? It's very intuitive, and that's how it should be. So if there's beastmen players that are new to the game, they're going to bring some Ungor herd thinking they're going to be good chaff, low-level chaff in a fight rather than the spearmen, and they're just wrong, and they're going to be losing games and not understand why. And on top of that, all the beastmen are in the bottom 10. Like the Ungor spearman herd are here in number 20, the spearman herd with shield are 23, and the Ungor herd are 27. And that is pretty awful. Like, that shows me the beastmen definitely need to rework. Now, do they need to be top 10? Probably not, because they do not rely on their low-level infantry like Bretonia and Skaven and even Empire. But, because they have mid-tier infantry. They're not very good, mind you. They're mid-tier infantry, but they have them. But the beastmen, I would say the beastmen infantry should show up sort of in your we'll call it your, from number 8 to number 25, right? Or, kind of in that mid to lower range, which is fine. But they should show up in the order that the Ungor herd shows up. Excuse me. The Ungor herd shows up highest, then the spearman herd, then the Ungor spearman herd, no matter what the gold is, because this is a value proposition. This isn't a straight up gold proposition. And then we should see the Empire does actually show up correctly with the swordsman and the spearman, but the spearmen with shields are way out, because the spearmen, just the basic spearmen at number 12, the swordsman at number 6, and then these spearmen with shields at number 4. So these spearmen with shields are just they're just out of place, and I think it's really, when I look at where they show up at number 4, really they should be showing up, spearmen, mind you, these are spearmen, they should be showing up maybe number 15, 16, 17, 18, somewhere in there, and then they would make a lot more sense in an infantry fight. This is not against anti-large or single entity unit models. This is just in this infantry fight, really. So the spearmen with shields definitely need a nerf. The beastmen, the Ungor herd, need a big buff. The spearman herd need somewhat of a buff to get over the spearman herd with shields, and really the Empire, that's how I look at this. Now we look at all of the undead units. Every undead unit is in the bottom 10, and fair enough, undead units all cause fear. They are unbreakable in that they crumble instead of routing, and so they have other things, and they can be healed with, or regenerated, or these types of things with Invocation of a Heck and other things like corpse carts and such. So they should end up showing at the bottom, and they generally do show up in the correct order. I really feel that zombies should at least kind of be in this middle tier. This is why I did the testing, and I showed that vampire zombies are really lower than they should be. I think really they should be costing 50 to 75 gold, because they're so damn slow, like 23. They're the slowest unit in the game, I think. But anyways, the skeleton spearmen show up exactly where they should. The undead have a lot of advantages for their infantry, and in just a straight up infantry on infantry fight, the spearmen should show up dead last. Then the skeleton warriors, and then the Ungors. And you kind of see that. Now the Clanrat spears are actually they're way down here, so they're, below some of these things. Maybe they should be a little higher. And the only reason I say that is because Skaven should actually, I think, have really good low tier infantry. This is just my opinion speaking more than how they actually show up. And you see there are some units like the Lizardmen with the Skink cohort. They show up very low. Now they do have a mechanic in that their aquatic trait that they actually become quite a bit stronger, but I think they are a little bit weak. Like, I think they should actually receive a touch of a buff. Because they are their only unit under 300 gold. Maybe they should be a little bit higher, or maybe they should be 275. So, like, not a big change, just a little one. They're not a bad unit though. They're pretty quick and they have lots of good things. The miners, this is very interesting. And I know I've showed some testing with miners, and just basic men-at-arms will beat miners in a fight, and this just shows how weak the miners, what a poor state dwarf miners are in. Not so much the miners with blasting charges, and I'll talk about that in a sec, but this is the only heavily armored, armor-piercing unit in the entire test. And it's going up against a heavily armored, non-armor piercing unit. The dwarf miners, just by way of a simple rock, paper, scissors, they are armor piercing, heavily armored, going up against a heavily armored, where their armor piercing will matter, unit that doesn't have armor piercing. So the dwarf miner should be doing really well. So in this test, it should be skewed to favor dwarf miners by a lot. You should see dwarf miners should end up number 1 in this test, just because they're the only armor-piercing unit in the test going up against dwarf warriors. But you can see how poor they are, really coming in at number 16. Now the miners with blasting charges, these blasting charges, again, it's just another way the test is a little bit skewed because I use dwarf warriors. Blasting charges aren't as good against armor, and they didn't get all their blasting charges off. So we know dwarf miners with blasting charges are actually a pretty decent little unit, and against other units like men-at-arms and goblins, I mean, these blasting charges are devastating. They are a very powerful unit, and these dwarf miners with blasting charges are probably correctly valued as we've gone through, but that is a consequence of the test, and that really does show how weak our dwarf miners go. This is how weak our dwarf miners are. One more piece of supporting testing to show that really miners need something. And if you go and look at my old testing, I go over in detail what I think they need, where I think they should be, and why I think it. Now, I liked the greenskins, night goblins, top 10, goblins, top 10, and I would say in the right order. Like, night goblins have poison, they have other things, like they're who would you pick and take on the field? You're probably going to take night goblins with that poison over goblins most of the time. But for 300 gold, the goblins still pull value, so they're a pretty good unit. And remember that these were tested using their poison, so they just snuck in at number 10. But they do have other things like stock and whatnot. But and I got a comment, that was saying, hey, I've actually found in my campaigns that, for example, by Empire Spearmen with shields, they just tend to work better for my frontline troops over top of swordsmen, and that's what I've really done in my live campaign. So I mean, I really like it when anecdotal or your intuition based on play is really matching up, and it matches up. Like, if you play the Dowie in the early game, it is just not worth bringing miners. Maybe 1 or 2 for breaking down doors or something, but they play really weak even in campaign, and any of my Dowie kin out there that have played campaign know how weak miners feel in campaign, and so you kind of see that. Now, this is really interested in that. I think Bretonia is the example of what under 400 gold units should look like, how they should stratify, and you can see the impact in the game. Now, no one in their right mind, knowing Bretonia and even understanding this, is going to say Bretonia is an amazing infantry faction, because they're not. Because we know low-level troops have other things. Peasant mobs are a very valuable unit for 100 gold, but I mean, all you have to do to make them rout is you fart in their general direction, right? Like there are a lot of negatives to these low-level troops. None of them have armor with the exception of the miners. Very low leadership. There's all kinds of reasons why Britonia having the best all-around infantry under 400 gold and under, and the perfectly stratified in infantry does not in and of itself make them good. So when I talk about things like, improving the dwarf miners and improving or nerfing the spearmen with shields, or vastly improving the Ungor herd and the Ungor spearmen, this is not game-breaking stuff. This just brings things in the game to be more intuitive, to make sense, especially for new players. And we are going to keep seeing new players. I mean, Game 3 comes, I think it's going to see another pretty big influx of new players. And if they really focus on multiplayer, because multiplayer is in a pretty good spot right now from what I can see, but if they focus on multiplayer and tournaments and stuff like this, game could have another explosion of new players. And it would be very nice for them to sort out some of these details before this big explosion happens, which I think is going to happen, where units are intuitive, where you pick a man-at-arms and you're in specifically for infantry holding, they will pull more value than a spearman-at-arms or a spearman-at-arms with shield. And you say, okay, that's Bretonian, I can get a men-at-arms with shields. I know in an infantry on infantry fight, I've got to pay. That's got to be a price, right? It's going to cost me to get that shield in terms of total value. This makes sense. This is how it should be, and Bretonia is just an excellent example of what low-tier infantry should sort out. And I really, really enjoyed the testing. Now, just out of curiosity, you might say that these peasant mobs are really, really useless. Now, it's true, they really are a unit for taking arrows, taking artillery fire, taking cavalry charges. I mean, they're peasants, right? They're peasants. But, when you look at the total value and you start doing back tests to see how these things sort out, they really do start to show their value. So I'm going to show a quick fight against Marauders at 400, the Norskin brand, against 4 peasants. Now they're both, the total value is 400 gold, 400 gold. But I mean, it's when you look at this type of fight, I mean, I like doing sort of some of these back tests just to confirm that what I'm thinking. It's kind of like the sniff test, if anyone's kind of familiar with that terminology, does it pass the sniff test? Does it make sense? And so we'll go just these guys here. Where are you? Okay, I want you here. Okay, just go over here. Okay, we'll get you over here. So we'll just get our peasants fighting against these, and you can see they're almost dead already. Well, not almost dead already, but you can see the peasants they're just going to crush them. I mean, it is obvious that they're going to demolish these marauders, and that's the simple fact that what peasant mobs can do at 400 gold versus marauders, that they could be in multiple places at once, and that is part of their value, right? Even if it was they were worth 200 gold and they had these stats, like these 4 are going to take this one unit without even breaking, right? And not a single unit broke. And yeah, the marauders, what they got, 136 kills, doesn't matter, right? It's irrelevant. So that's the kind of thing that I'm really talking about when I look at the back checks to look at the value. And you can kind of see that the high value, our highest value unit at 400 gold. What is our highest value unit at 400 gold? Our Empire Swordsman. And our lowest value unit is our Ungor herd. We can go and get them. So we get to this Swordsman, and we go down here and get the Beastmen, and we get the Ungor herd. And we should in general see that these guys, swordsmen, should just win against the Ungor herd. So it's not going to be as crushing as, it'll never be as crushing as when you have a 2v1 or a 3v1, which peasants and Skaven slaves and these kind of units sort of give you, but it should be generally reliable, where, yeah, you can see they already think they're winning, you know, they're in melee. These guys have Primal Fury, which plus 5 melee attack, and they have that until their leadership is lower than 50%. So what is their... Yeah, it'll come out pretty soon. So, I mean, they're not absolutely... Oh, 24, yeah, they're beating them pretty good. Never mind. Yeah, and you can see. So the swordsman got 78 kills to 33 for the Unger herd, so they are pretty much beating the brakes off them, which is more than I even would have expected. But, you know, and that's sort of back testing that the value proposition that we put forward is making sense. That's telling me that the way that we've gone through and valued the units in terms of the spreadsheet, the testing that we did is sort of showing that it's not 100% correct. Again, this is just one test. This is just one way of evaluating them. You know, you might say, well, you shouldn't use one of these, or you should use more criteria to evaluate them, or should use more testing. And I can't disagree. You absolutely can. But this test is absolutely repeatable. In 5 years' time, when 150 changes have taken place, you can redo this test and you will have a very, very good comparison as to how things have changed. You'll be able to look at how these things have stratified, what units have gone up and what have gone down. And that's why I really like simple repeatable testing, because not only does it give you a very strong data point, doesn't give you all the data, it gives you a very strong data point, it also gives you something you can evaluate over time. So maybe the next patch, you'll see the Empire Spearmen with shields get nerfed a little bit, and the Beastman Ungor herd and the Ungor Spearman herd get buffed, and we can go back and test and see where they come out in this bit of testing. Maybe we see the miners eventually get the love that they need, and they will change, or skin cohorts, or whatever comes up. We will be able to come back to this testing because it's very, very repeatable, and actually understand what this looks like, which is really, this is why I really love this sort of testing and looking at this. And I'd be careful to put the date that the test took place. I did this test quite a long time ago. Had summer, and I'm up in Canada. It's very cold here, so we try and make use of our summer. It's snowing here again now, so it's time to get back doing the videos. But I put the date that it was done and all the data that's in there. So I mean, you can see, how did Spearmen at Arms perform? How many seconds did they last? What was their average finishing? What was their DPS, or damage per second? And what were their ratios? What did they look like? And these types of things I think are useful when you come back and look at this information in the future. You can go back and you can get a good comparison note. So what the changes that were made, what did they actually do in terms of real value in the game, particularly in multiplayer? And that's sort of what this test was all about. Now, I just wanted to put forward a discussion point. I do, your eyes are bigger than your stomach. The optimist in me wants to do this testing for all infantry. So the next test would be infantry from 401 gold to 600, and then 601 to 800, and to continue to do that and to keep doing it over time as new units are entered. So I will hopefully someday, it might be a year. There's other stuff I've wanted to do, and anybody who's was wanting to do a AI tournament, I mean, I haven't forgotten. There's all these things you want to do. Anyways, I would love to hear from you. I would absolutely love to hear from you as to the test, your thoughts on the data, your thoughts on the testing as a whole, any testing that you've done, or any anecdotal evidence that can support the value proposition that I have, or can refute it. Things that you've seen that maybe don't line up with what the test results are showing. And for me, this is like putting this on YouTube, it's a hobby on top of a hobby, right? I love the hobby of Total War Warhammer, and then the hobby of putting it online so we can share it with people. Now, the second hobby, the YouTube hobby, the very best part of it is the comments. That is the everything of the hobby, that part of the hobby. That's why I love comments so much. It is so interesting, so many, even, to say hello, or to say, I really like this unit, or, I would like to see this unit, or, I've had people give funny stories or say things in Kazaleed or do whatever. I love any comment because of that. I mean, this is just a hobby, and that is what makes this side of the hobby very interesting. So I really appreciate comments, and I have done so many videos because of comments. I probably should keep a running count, but someone will say something in the comment, or they'll correct a mistake that I've made, and I'll redo a video and learn something new, or, I'll test something I didn't think about testing, or I'll test it in a different way I thought about, or I'll look at a new build. I've seen replays submitted where I've seen some amazing builds or amazing concept, like the 20 stack concept, incredible, awesome. Some of the things that I've learned from this side of my hobby have been amazing, and I love interacting and look forward to comments, or just, hey, cheers. That's fun too. So hope you found it interesting, and I will see you soon.